He sent your picture into the boys' chat and wrote 4 words beneath it. I'm done looking now. No warning, no permission, no nervous question mark asking what they thought. He was not inviting opinions. He was closing a case. And that is why the first card on the table is justice. Not as fortune-telling. Not as a guarantee that someone is secretly planning your future. Justice here is the psychological moment when a person can no longer hide behind excuses, because the evidence has become stronger than the defense. For years, this man has acted like every connection failed for practical reasons. Bad timing, different lifestyles, too much pressure, not enough chemistry. But his friends know those explanations were polished versions of one fear. If he never chooses anyone, nobody can hurt him. Then he chose your photo. And listen, it was not the glamorous one. It was the picture where your attention was somewhere else, where your face looked peaceful because you were not monitoring it. Maybe you were laughing at something outside the frame. Maybe you were listening so closely that your guard disappeared. He selected the version of you that cannot be manufactured, because that is the version that made his old story collapse. The scales on this card matter. One side holds the life he has protected. Independence, control, emotional distance, the right to leave before anything becomes dangerous. The other side holds one candid image of you. And somehow, that image outweighs years of self-protection. His friends understood immediately. One of them celebrated because he had already noticed the changes. The way this man checks his phone without realizing it. The way your name enters conversations that have nothing to do with romance. The way he defends qualities he once claimed annoyed him. Another friend typed, "Are you actually serious?" But the most important reaction came from the friend who said nothing. He stared at the photo, then at those 4 words, and realized something before anyone else did. This was not a crush announcement. It was an accountability moment. Their friend had finally made a statement he could be measured against. And justice asks the uncomfortable question. Now that you have spoken the truth privately, will your actions honor it publicly? Because sending your picture was easy. What he is preparing to say to your face is where the verdict finally begins. And the chat changed after that. The jokes arrived first, because that is what men often use when a moment becomes too honest too quickly. One friend typed, "Should we start shopping for suits now?" Another sent a ring emoji, then 3 question marks, as if turning the whole thing into a joke might make the weight of those 4 words easier to hold. Normally, he would have joined them. He would have laughed, exaggerated, said something careless enough to create an escape route later. He could have claimed he was tired when he sent it. He could have called it a dramatic moment. He could have reduced you to a passing feeling before anyone expected him to stand behind it. But he did not take the exit. And that is why Temperance appears now, not as a promise of perfect harmony. Not as proof that 2 people are destined to blend into one life. Temperance is what happens when emotion has to survive contact with reality. It is the space between feeling everything and acting without thought. The card does not ask whether his feelings are intense. The boys' chat already knows they are. It asks whether he can carry that intensity without spilling it everywhere. One friend stopped teasing and asked, "What changed?" He stared at the question longer than he expected. Because the honest answer was not that you had performed some extraordinary romantic gesture. You had not chased him into certainty. You had not convinced him with pressure, promises, or perfect timing. You had simply remained yourself long enough for his defenses to become exhausting. That was the change. Around you, he was beginning to notice how much energy he spent pretending not to care. Every delayed reply was calculated. Every casual goodbye was edited. Every time he wanted to ask one more question, he forced himself to act satisfied with less. Temperance exposes that kind of imbalance. One hand pours from one cup to another, but nothing is wasted. Feeling becomes language. Attraction becomes intention. Private certainty becomes public responsibility. And then the silent friend finally typed. Not a joke, not congratulations, just 3 words. Does she know? The chat went still. Because this was the question that separated a declaration from a relationship. His friends had seen your photograph. They had heard his conclusion. But you, the person whose face had been placed beneath those words, had not been given the same clarity. His confidence disappeared the moment he imagined your response. What if you felt exposed instead of chosen? What if his certainty sounded like pressure? What if he had mistaken your warmth for an answer you had never actually given? Justice had forced him to state the truth. Temperance now required him to deliver it carefully. He had created a standard with 4 words, and from this point forward, every silence, every hesitation, and every action would be measured against it. Finally, he replied, "Not yes, not no, not yet, but I think she feels it. And maybe you did." Not because he confessed. Because he kept leaving evidence in places where a casual person would have left nothing. That is why the Nine of Pentacles appears reversed. Not as a warning that independence is bad. Not as a prediction that someone is about to lose control. Upright, this card knows how to stand alone without apologizing for it. Reversed. It asks what happens when self-sufficiency becomes a performance. When a person is so committed to appearing unaffected that every act of care has to enter through a side door. He thought he was being subtle. His friends knew better. There was the conversation that should have ended 20 minutes earlier. You had already answered his question. The original subject was finished. But instead of saying goodnight, he found another detail to examine. Then another. He asked what you meant by one sentence, even though he understood it perfectly. He returned to something you had mentioned at the beginning. Not because clarification was necessary, but because ending the conversation felt harder than pretending it still had somewhere to go. Then there was the insignificant detail. Something small enough that you may have forgotten saying it. A specific snack you liked. The name of a place you passed as a child. The fact that one ordinary sound made you uncomfortable. Weeks later, he brought it back into the conversation as if it had remained on the surface of his mind the entire time. It had not. He had stored it. Emotionally guarded people often reveal attachment this way. They do not begin with declarations. They begin with unnecessary attention. They remember what serves no practical purpose. They extend moments that have already completed their function. They protect information nobody asked them to keep. And then there was the goodbye. That was the moment he believed you noticed. He paused after saying your name. Long enough for another sentence to form. Long enough for honesty to enter the room. He almost told you that seeing you had changed the shape of his entire day. Instead, he said, "Text me when you get home." Practical. Safe. Easy to defend. But the concern arrived with too much weight for the sentence carrying it. One friend in the chat remembered hearing about that goodbye. Another remembered how he checked his phone until you responded. Suddenly, "I think she feels it," did not sound like confidence. It sounded like an admission that he had been communicating in fragments and hoping you would assemble them correctly. But chemistry is not clarity. Attention is not intention. And sensing that someone cares is not the same as knowing what they are willing to do about it. One friend typed, "She might know you feel something. That doesn't mean she knows what you want." The Nine of Pentacles reversed asks whether his independence has become so rehearsed that you are being forced to study the mistakes in the performance. The silent friend waited. Then he wrote, "Then stop making her translate you." And that sentence changed the argument. Because the problem was no longer whether you had understood his feelings. The problem was that he had used your image to express them before asking whether you wanted to be part of that expression. That is why the 6 of Cups appears here. Not as nostalgia. not as a promise that this connection comes from another lifetime. The Six of Cups is the psychological temptation to treat tenderness as innocence, as if a warm intention automatically makes every choice harmless. He had looked at your photo and felt something soft, recognition, safety, familiarity, maybe even the strange relief of seeing a person and realizing he no longer wanted to keep searching for someone easier to lose. But tenderness does not erase consent, and being proud of you does not make your image his to distribute. The silent friend understood that before he did. He typed, "You know she didn't send that picture to the group, right?" His first reaction was defensive, not angry, just immediate. "They're my closest friends," as though trust could be transferred. As though because he trusted them, you had agreed to trust them too. Then he added, "I wasn't making fun of her." And that sentence revealed the distance he still had to cross. Because harm is not limited to humiliation. A boundary can be crossed by affection. Privacy can be interrupted by admiration. Someone can mean to honor you and still remove your choice from the moment. Justice returns here, but the scales are holding something different now. On one side, his intention. He wanted his friends to see the person who had changed him. He wanted to make the feeling real by placing it in front of witnesses. On the other side, the impact. Your face entered a conversation you did not know existed. Your image became evidence in a decision you had not been invited to discuss. He announced a conclusion about the two of you before giving you the dignity of hearing the question. The silent friend wrote again. Finding the one doesn't make her yours. Then another message. Not her picture, not her story, not her answer. He stared at those words. The Six of Cups asks whether he can preserve the softness of what he feels without becoming careless with the person who inspired it. And for the first time, he saw the difference. He had not shared the photo because his feelings were shallow. He had shared it because they were overwhelming, but emotional intensity is not permission. So he deleted the image from the chat. Not the 4 words, not the truth behind them, just the part that was never his to give away. The friends watched the notification appear. Photo deleted. Then another message followed. I should have asked her first. And now the real question was not whether he understood his mistake. It was whether he would admit it to you, or quietly correct the evidence and protect the version of himself you still believed. He did not want to hide it. That decision came before he knew how to explain it. And that is why the world appears now, not as a perfect ending, not as proof that everything has reached its destined conclusion. The world is the psychological moment when a person can no longer separate who they want to become from what they are willing to admit they have done. Emotionally immature attraction wants to be admired. It wants the confession to sound beautiful. It wants the mistake to become evidence of passion. It wants to say, I only did it because I care about you so much. And hope the intensity of the feeling distracts from the absence of permission. Serious attachment is different. Serious attachment becomes willing to be seen accurately. His friends expected him to minimize it, to say the picture was gone, so the problem was solved, to convince himself that no damage could exist if you never found out. Instead, he typed, how do I tell her without making it sound like I'm trying to get credit for telling her? The chat paused again. One friend answered first. He gave him a speech, a polished one. Something about how your presence had changed his entire life, how he had never felt this certain, how sharing your photo was an impulsive act of pride because he could not contain what you meant to him. It sounded romantic. It also placed him at the center of every sentence. The silent friend rejected it immediately. No, then. That makes you the hero for confessing to something she didn't choose. And there it was. The difference between honesty and performance. A performance manages your reaction. It arranges the facts carefully, adds enough emotion to soften them, and presents remorse in a way designed to produce forgiveness. Honesty gives up that control. Tell her what you did. Tell her why without pretending the reason excuses it. Apologize. Then let her feel whatever she feels. The world holds every element around it because completion does not mean perfection. It means nothing important has been pushed outside the frame. His affection belongs in the truth. So does his carelessness. So does your right to be flattered, uncomfortable, angry, amused, or all four at once. And listen. Rejection was no longer the thing frightening him most. He had survived rejection before. Rejection allowed him to walk away with his self-image intact. But disappointing you was different. Because disappointment would mean you had seen something trustworthy in him, and his behavior had failed to protect it. He opened your messages, typed a paragraph, deleted it. Typed, "Please don't be mad." Deleted that, too. Then, "I need to tell you something, but it's not as bad as it sounds." Gone. Every version tried to direct your response before you had the facts. Finally, he stopped trying to sound romantic. Stopped trying to sound harmless. Stopped trying to complete the story before you entered it, and he sent one message. "Can I talk to you about something I handled badly?" You saw the message before he was ready for you to see it. "Can I talk to you about something I handled badly?" And the wording matters. He did not say, "I need to tell you something." That would have centered the secret. He did not say, "Don't be mad." That would have assigned you a reaction before you knew what happened. He did not say, "It's not a big deal." That would have reduced the impact before you were allowed to measure it for yourself. He named his handling as the problem. Not your sensitivity, not the situation. Not some misunderstanding waiting to be explained away. His handling. And that is why the Knight of Wands appears here. Not as a sign that someone is rushing toward you with a dramatic confession. Not as proof that passion is about to override every obstacle. The Knight of Wands is the psychological impulse to move faster than wisdom can follow. To act while the feeling is hot, then search for language after the consequences arrive. That was how the picture entered the chat. Impulse first, meaning second. Permission nowhere. But now the card is asking whether he can remain still after creating motion. Because the silence after his message became its own kind of trial. He watched the screen. No immediate response. And every old habit returned at once. Send another message. Add context. Tell you not to worry. Make a joke. Use a laughing emoji to lower the temperature. He even typed, "It sounds worse than it is." Then deleted it. Because that sentence would have done exactly what he was trying not to do. Decide the size of the mistake for you. The Knight of Wands knows how to enter a moment. It does not always know how to stay inside one. And staying was the work now. No performance. No escape route. No attempt to turn his anxiety into your responsibility. Justice had already shown him that truth creates a standard. This pause showed him what that standard would cost. Accountability was not only admitting the facts. It was tolerating the seconds in which he could not control what those facts would mean to someone else. Then your typing bubble appeared, disappeared, returned. He felt the instinct to fill the gap again. He did not. Finally, your reply came. "Okay, we can talk." Relief moved through him too quickly, then stopped. Because permission to enter the conversation was not permission to direct it. You had opened the door. You had not promised what would happen once he stepped through. And that was the reversal he had not prepared for. He had spent all this time preparing to confess his feelings. Now he had to confess his mistake first. So he told you the least romantic part first. "I sent a picture of you to the group chat." No long introduction. No attempt to hide the fact inside a compliment. He explained which picture. The candid one. The one where you were not posing because you did not know anyone would be studying the moment later. Then he told you what he wrote beneath it. "I'm done looking now." And that is why the Two of Wands appears here. Not as a prediction that two people are planning a life together, not as proof that a shared future has already been selected. The Two of Wands is the psychological distance between imagining a direction and receiving another person's agreement to walk there. He had chosen a direction privately. You had not been consulted. He did not say the excitement made him do it. He did not claim his friends asked to see you. He did not explain that they were good people, as though their character could replace your consent. He simply said, "I should have asked you first. I'm sorry." Then he stopped. And the pause matters, because an apology can become another form of pressure when it arrives with an expectation attached. Reassure me. Forgive me quickly. Tell me I am still the person you thought I was. He asked for none of that. He let the discomfort remain where it belonged, between what he intended and what he actually did. You were quiet. At first, he assumed you were thinking about the picture, who had seen it, how long it had stayed in the chat, whether anyone had saved it before he deleted it. Those questions mattered, but they were not the only questions moving through you. Because beneath the image were 4 words that reached further than the photograph itself. I'm done looking now. The Two of Wands holds possibility at a distance. A person can stare toward a future, imagine its shape, even feel certain about the road, and still forget that another human being is not a destination waiting to be claimed. He saw the change in your face. Not anger exactly, not flattery either. Something more careful. Because his sentence had made you part of a future before the two of you had clearly defined the present. It sounded certain in the boys' chat. But certainty spoken about you is not the same as certainty built with you. For the first time, he understood that you were not only deciding how you felt about the photo. You were deciding what those 4 words had placed on your shoulders. He had prepared for questions about privacy. He had prepared to apologize again. He had even prepared for you to walk away. But he had not prepared for the question you finally asked. What exactly did you mean by done looking? He did not answer quickly, because the easiest version would have sounded the most certain. It means you're the one, clean, romantic, impossible to misunderstand, and incomplete. That is why the 8 of Wands appears now. Not as a prediction that everything is about to move at impossible speed. Not as proof that a message, confession, or relationship is guaranteed to arrive. The 8 of Wands is the psychological moment when thoughts that have been delayed for too long begin reaching their destination all at once. He had 4 words for his friends. But you needed more than a conclusion. You needed the reasoning beneath it. So he said, "I didn't mean I already decided our whole future." Then he corrected himself. "Actually, I think part of me did decide too much without asking you. But that isn't what I meant by done looking. Honest, not polished." He explained that for years, every person had been measured against somebody imaginary. Someone easier, someone with perfect timing. Someone who would understand him without requiring him to become understandable. Whenever a connection became real enough to demand courage, he would look past it toward the possibility that a safer person might exist somewhere else, a better fit, a cleaner story, less risk. And because the imaginary person never arrived, she never disappointed him. Then he met you. Not perfect, not effortless, real enough to challenge the comparison. The 8 of Wands shows movement without pretending movement is certainty. Meeting you did not remove every fear. It removed his ability to call avoidance wisdom. That was the shift. The one was not the person who made every question disappear. It was the person who made his old answers stop working. He still wondered whether the timing could fail. Whether your differences might become difficult. Whether choosing you would expose parts of him he had spent years protecting. But he no longer wanted to use fear as evidence against the choice. And listen, that is the difference between dramatic certainty and conscious commitment. Dramatic certainty says, "I know exactly how this ends." Commitment says, "I do not know how this ends, but I am willing to stop treating uncertainty like a reason not to begin. The defense finally rested because it had run out of honest arguments. No more imaginary alternatives. No more searching for someone who would let him remain unchanged. No more pretending distance was discernment. Then he looked at you and admitted the part that embarrassed him most. My friends heard my conclusion before you heard my question. He paused. Not to create suspense, to make sure the next words belonged to the present, not the future he had already imagined. And now I want to ask it properly. He did not ask you to promise forever. He did not ask whether you could already see a ring, a house, a life arranged around the certainty he had announced too early. He asked something smaller and more difficult. Would you be willing to see where this goes if I stop treating it like something I have to hide? That is why the King of Pentacles appears here. Not as a guarantee of marriage. Not as proof that someone is ready to build a permanent future. The King of Pentacles is the psychological difference between possessing an idea and becoming responsible for it. He had already possessed the idea of you. He had carried it into the boys' chat, displayed it, named it, let other people witness the certainty before you had been given the choice to enter it. But responsibility looks different. Responsibility asks, it waits. It does not confuse confidence with consent. So he added, I mean intentionally, just us. No pretending this is casual if it isn't. But only if that is what you want too. Then he stopped. No speech after the question. No explanation designed to make yes feel easier. No promise that he would never make another mistake. Just the invitation and the silence around it. And listen, that silence was the first concrete proof that his 4 words might have substance. Because in the boys' chat, he had controlled the entire moment. He chose the picture. He wrote the conclusion. He decided when the announcement began and what it meant. Here, he controlled nothing except his own behavior. His friends were no longer the audience that mattered. Their approval could not answer for you. Their excitement could not make the connection mutual. Their jokes, their questions, even the silent friend's correction had all brought him to this point. But none of them could cross it with him. You looked at him for a long moment, not to punish him. To measure whether the person asking this question was different from the person who had already answered it privately. Then you said, I do want to see where this goes. Warmth entered his face before he could hide it. But you were not finished. Because willingness is not surrender. Interest is not permission to return to vagueness. And forgiveness is not an agreement to carry all the emotional risk while he keeps the truth hidden in rooms where you are absent. So you gave him the condition. Being done looking only matters if you're also done hiding. He did not defend himself. He did not ask what that meant. He knew, and the way he answered showed that the real decision had only just begun. He answered by changing what happened next. Not with a promise. Not with a speech about how different everything would be now. He opened the boys' chat, and that is why strength appears here. Not as dominance. Not as the ability to overpower fear, control another person, or force a relationship into certainty. Strength is the psychological discipline to remain gentle when control would feel easier. He could have sent the group every detail. He could have told them you were interested, repeated your exact words, turned your private reaction into the final scene of the announcement they had already witnessed. That would have made him feel validated. It also would have repeated the mistake. So he typed only, "We talked. I apologized. We're going to take this seriously." One friend immediately asked, "What did she say?" Another sent the ring emoji again. The silent friend did not ask for details. He understood. This time, their friend had returned to the chat without bringing you into it. No photo, no screenshot. No quotation that belonged to a conversation you had trusted him to hold privately. Just enough truth to stand behind what he had already declared. Then he put the phone away. That was his answer to your condition. Not complete, not proven forever, but visible, because being done hiding would not mean exposing everything. It would mean no longer giving strangers, friends, or private rooms a clearer version of his intentions than the one he gave you. It would mean saying what he felt before resentment turned it into distance. Asking instead of assuming. Listening without preparing a defense. Respecting your boundaries even when his intentions felt romantic, and accepting that you would evaluate him over time. Strength does not ask him to become fearless. It asks him to stop letting fear make his decisions quietly. Justice returns one final time here, but the verdict is not that he found the one because he announced it beneath a photograph. Words cannot close that case. The verdict will be written through repetition. What he does when excitement becomes ordinary. How he behaves when communication is inconvenient. Whether he protects your autonomy when nobody is watching. Whether his public certainty can survive private accountability. And listen, being chosen should never require you to surrender your voice. You do not become someone's future because they imagined one. You do not owe agreement because their feelings are intense. The right kind of choosing leaves you free enough to choose back. He sent 4 words to the boys' chat. I'm done looking now. But those words were never the ending. They were the standard. He may be done looking. Now he has to begin showing. And for the first time, he appears ready to do exactly that.